Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Finstep Asia Climate and FinTech series. We are looking at what is the tipping point and how FinTech can essentially help mitigate climate change. We have with us Adam Bumpus, who is the Chief Energy Officer and co-founder of ION Tech. A lot to do with energy, a lot to do with changing how we look at handling climate change with the use of innovative technologies. Welcome, Adam. How are you doing this morning?
Great, thanks, Musheer. Wonderful to be here. Fantastic to hear all the great people you got happening on this and this push for fintech and climate change together.
Right. I mean, look, the key element for us when we're running the series is to highlight how climate change is not going to be a problem that's going to be only solved through governments and large-scale actions. That is definitely critical, but this is need of a community and especially the tech community to make a change. And fintech is a big part of what we do in today's world. How about we start off with hearing a little bit more about yourself, right? What has been your personal journey and your professional journey? What attracted you to move towards something that is focused on climate change? And then we can talk about the story behind ION Tech.
Thanks, Musheer. Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess, look, I started off my professional career as an ecologist. So I did my first undergraduate degree was in ecology. So I spent my time understanding systems and systems theory and the way that our ecosystems work together, basically. And so I started off in that, and that really put me on this path of understanding, hey, we've got this, and this was in the late 1990s. So climate change we knew about, we didn't have anything really in place. Kyoto Protocol came in 97. And so things were happening, but it wasn't really the way it is today. There was not much really that was really binding for it. And I just got fascinated with the way the world works, the way humans interact with it, and the way we can actually essentially create systems change for the better. And so I fast forward a few years from there, I did a master's and then ended up writing, I worked in London for a while on climate change publications and how do we communicate this with corporates. And so I kind of ended up thinking, hey, there's something about business here that is so critically important for how we're going to solve climate change, because business essentially has been the big driver of the climate change problem of large fossil fuel industry, everything we rely on, oil and across the world for the lifeblood of our economies has been the thing that's driven climate change. And so I knew business was the problem, so their business has to be the solution. And that's at the same time, I was getting increasingly interested in financial mechanisms that were being promoted at things like the UN Climate Change Convention. And so I got really interested in how climate change, business and financial mechanisms, it wasn't called fintech then, but it basically was new regulatory fintech, could work together. And so I went to Oxford, I wrote my PhD on carbon finance, which was essentially, how do we use finance in a new way to fund offsets in developing countries that then funds new renewable energy, switches off old coal, fossil fuel energy, and then sends those credits back? And so essentially it's creating a virtual commodity and a system that enables this to be channel financed in the right way. And this was in the mid 2000s when the carbon offset market was, $36 billion, and it was all going super well until we had no post 2012 Kyoto target and the whole thing collapsed. And what I really found from that was that I could see there were three major things that were going to happen that was inexorable the way we're going to have to solve climate change. One is that finance will be at the heart of it because we have to have the money to make it work. Two is that finance can be switched and twisted and pushed into different ways to make it work for certain social environmental outcomes. And three, that it's actually people who make those decisions. Like it's individuals at the end of those finance chains who decide what's going to happen. Funnily enough, in the carbon market crash, in the sort of late 2000s, the only credits that held their value were the ones that had high sustainable development outcomes attached to them because people were buying it, because someone here wanted that high development outcome over here. And fast forward all the way through to ION, the Internet of Energy Network, and what we're doing at RedGrid is that same philosophy and same approach became our very first pilot program we ever did, which was connecting solar panels and people with excess solar in Germany to a village in Bangladesh, essentially. Now, we wrote a protocol and just managed to transfer value, but it was the first thing that showed how we could use the blockchain to enable value exchange, not kilowatts, but a value exchange associated with clean energy from one place to another. And that was fascinating, and it really stood the test of time, that case study, as a way that the world is moving. And so for me, it's been a 20-year journey, I suppose, working on climate change and fintech mechanisms, but called different things as we went along it. And I think the other part of this is that I guess what gets me up in the morning to do this every day is that we have so much potential. There's so much potential now in the crypto markets and in FinTech more generally to deal with this incredible problem. Like it's not every generation gets the opportunity to deal with a problem of this magnitude. And so I think actually we're really lucky as a generation to have this opportunity to solve it. And, we're not going to drift through life doing random things that make no sense. And the end of it, you're like, oh, why did I do that? Actually, we're drifting. We're not drifting at all. We're actually pushing through to create a new world. And so for me and my team, like we have an astounding team. That's why we get up every morning and that's why we do it. So yeah, I guess that's the history and that's why I'm pushing this.
Look, that's a very interesting history, and you have all the energy that is needed when we're discussing about this history. Now, it's quite fascinating, right? What you mentioned about the first crash, as it were, in the carbon markets, and for some people, it seems to be something new. But as is the case in many different technology innovations or cycles, they start quite a while back, and people assume that this was overnight, but one of our advisors, Pranam Reddy, who did his master's in carbon management, 15 years ago in Glasgow before COP, right? So it's like there's a lot that was happening in the industry, but you needed that impetus, right, for things to change, and that's where we've reached, as we said, the tipping point for climate change and how technology can actually mitigate that. Now, you've mentioned about, briefly about how ION Tech has been working on this. We also have the work that is being done in the space with regards to the Internet of Things. With regards to the Internet of Things. Do you want to mention about how RedGrid and ION Tech work together?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. So when we started, so my co-founder, Simon, and Alex and Dylan and I, when we started RedGrid, we were really focused on, what blockchain could do for energy. And this was 2018. And we just looked at all the other solutions that were out there, and they were trying to do some good things and still doing good things, but didn't quite solve the problems we saw that it needed to be solved, which was the ability to have microtransactions happening at a device level, because that's the way that the world is going to head. So we then decided to move back from just doing protocol development and actually work on a product that we'd sell commercially. So that's when we formed RedGrid as a for-profit, company in Australia that sells products to corporate clients. Basically, we sell the ability for people to manage their energy better, save energy, use the grid when it's green, all that kind of stuff. But underneath it, we knew we were going to build out the protocol that would make this filter and connect directly between what's happening in the kind of commercial world in reality for people's homes. Like literally, about 3 kilometers from my house here, we've got an installation of our stuff going across a large development in Melbourne. And we had to go back to saying, okay, well, what's the protocol that's going to run this? Now, we met the guys at Holochain 4 years ago or so, maybe 3.5, 4 years ago. And, really love what Holochain is doing. It's not a blockchain, it's a post-blockchain solution. It gives so much of the benefits that we need in energy. And we just said, right, that's it. That's what we're going to go for. And so we had this sort of development of RedGrid as a commercial entity, but we knew we wanted to and had to have this open source component of what we're going to build. And that became the Internet of Energy Network. And so you can see RedGrid is like Red Hat was to Linux. So Linux is ION and RedGrid is more like Red Hat. Although the name, that's not why we call it RedGrid, but it just so happens that's why it came, that's what it looks like. But ION is a not-for-profit international organization that is focused about bringing the ION protocol to the world. So, and open sourcing that. So we've open sourced the protocol. We have a number of programs underway now, like we've got a bounty program, bringing in extra developers. We work with developers all over the world to contribute to the protocol. And what's really cool about that is that we can harness the power of the crowd. And you mentioned at the beginning, community. And I think that's the only thing, that's one of the key things that's going to get us out of climate change alongside the technology is the community behind it. And so ION is you can look at it in 2 ways. ION is a not-for-profit, community-driven protocol development and proliferation organization. We want to get the protocol out there for as many people to use as possible. RedGrid builds on that. And so everything that RedGrid has developed and is developing and is selling is built on the ION protocol. So, and a bunch of other people can build on the ION protocol as well. That's totally cool. We want as many people as possible to build on it. That's fantastic. But the difference there is that RedGrid bundles it all up, makes it nice and easy, gives it and sells it to corporates who just want to use the end product. They don't have to have time coding in holochain or doing any of that. So that's the way it works. And we see this as a really important way to commercialize RedGrid, but also to get this to the world, because one is that we work together, but they're not tied to each other, right? One can work without the other. And that's what's really cool about this. And I think that gives us flexibility to deal with many different use cases that are going to come for climate change.
Okay. So, you're mentioning about the many different use cases. Do you have some in mind that you want to highlight specifically?
Yeah, sure. So one of the use cases that we work with is the creation of virtual microgrids or virtual power plants. They've been called in different ways. We call them virtual microgrids because there's actually a larger suite of different devices we work with. So the use case here is energy prices are going up, electricity prices are going up world over, yet we have this incredible group of distributed energy resources, solar, batteries, EVs coming down the line that will just, they are going to proliferate around the world. Like we've seen the curves, and the world is ahead of the curves in terms of the adoption of these technologies. And so we have this tension here that there's all these new technologies coming in, but they can't speak to each other and they don't understand each other very well. And in the house, in our homes, we're consuming more electricity, and we're having to pay more for that electricity. So how do we reconcile those two things together? So a use case for us is we implement the ION protocol and the ION ledger, essentially. It's I don't really like to call it a ledger, but it is, but it's an agent. So the difference between us and any other blockchain technology is we're built on holochains. If you know anything about holochain, it's agent-centric, which means that each individual device has its own identity in the system and can coordinate and communicate with others that are relevant to it. And so the use case here is, as a user, I want to reduce my energy costs, use energy when it's completely carbon free, and I want to get rewarded for doing that. And to be able to do that, I have to interact with these other devices that are near me. They could be the next door neighbor's air conditioner, it could be my next door neighbor's battery, it could be the community battery down the road. I have to integrate with those and be able to interact with them and pay and settle with them in real time. And the reason it has to be in real time is because the way the grid works is it's high fossil fuels at sometimes, low fossil fuels at other, and it's going to get increasingly complex and increasingly volatile. And so we have to do this in real time. We have to do it fast. And so as that user, I want to save money. I want it to be green. And therefore I use this protocol to manage my balances, the way that my devices talk to my next door neighbors, talk to the one down the road, and settle who is demanding and who is supplying electricity in real time. And all that is essentially it's a billing engine, it's a payments engine for the new energy economy. And that's seriously what we've just built at the bottom. And the commercialization of that is, how on earth do you connect those devices together? Well, RedGrid kind of does that. And so the use case is that's one example. And so for example, a client of ours is a major property developer. So major property developers, smart cities developers, we have discussions happening around the world on smart cities development, who see this complementary currency as a component of building the new smart cities of the future. And so these are pretty forward-thinking organizations, I got to be honest, right? So we work with one of Australia's largest property developers. They're pretty full on in how forward-thinking they are when you really think about it. And they're implementing this because they see it as competitive advantage, but they also see they've got this large group of people who are coming to them saying, yeah, I want to buy a new house, but I also want it to be sustainable. I want to have newest technology, and I want it to be future-proof because they know this wave is coming. And so we just basically build in the technology, give them 4 years of free subscription, and we just power this through the walls of their house essentially. Yeah, and there's we have use cases that we can dive into on electric vehicles, on community batteries, and we're running projects on all of that right now.
Okay, I found it very interesting. One of your main principles being a not-for-profit is the end impact, right? And you mentioned about individuals. You're talking about property managers who are, to a large extent, very commercially driven because it's a business, and that's completely understandable. And now we're seeing that meeting of the two elements, actually three elements. One, a not-for-profit which is trying to essentially mitigate climate change. On the other hand, you have the property developers who are looking at something more sustainable, but also something that attracts their clients, right? Because user, if you're going to use the term very broadly, right, the end user, their behaviors are changing rapidly across products, right? From real estate all the way to how you consume, right? Be it paper cups, to your cutlery, plastic cutlery, etc., all the way to what you drive to work, as you mentioned, EV, all of these things that come into picture. And then, so you have these three motivations kind of converging together as we go forward. And then you're having the technology underlying that, which essentially is blockchain, is spinning them together. Now, my question here is, for quite a few people, blockchain is cryptic, right? To use that pun there, because, and for a lot of them, it's just speculative crypto industry. That's what it is. They, for a person on the street, Bitcoin and blockchain can quite often be the same, right? I'm not saying for everybody, but for a vast majority, they think of it as the same. But it would be great if you could just articulate a little bit more about why blockchain is needed here versus using anything that already exists. You have grids in Europe where you have shared grids where people can share, and it's all automated. You have programs and very scalable and tested technologies. Why should blockchain be there? And secondly, as an end user, both as a property company as well as an individual buying that property or renting that property, how much do I need to know of blockchain and all of these to make use of IOEN Tech's technology, or RedGrid's technology, as it were?
Yeah, great question. Look, I completely agree, and I love what you said about there, that people's preferences are changing. As consumers, that they're demanding different things, and that's exactly right. I'll talk about it in two different ways. When we're at RedGrid and we're producing these commercial products for clients, we don't talk about blockchain. Like this, we don't talk about that. It's just part of the stack that makes it better and more scalable, secure, more private. Does a whole bunch of compliance for GDPR in Europe, does a whole bunch of consumer data right compliance in Australia. That's really great. We just talk about the outcome. We talk about the impact that it has. We don't talk about the actual technology underpinning it, because it's just, as you said, like people they're like, Bitcoin is blockchain. And so we don't need to really dive into that. If people want to dive into it, we are super happy to geek out with them on that, but we just don't need to do that. When we're talking about IOEN, it's a bit different, because IOEN really is, it really is breaking new ground in the way we look at it. And I prefer to call it just Web3 rather than just blockchain, because we have this really interesting model within IOEN, which is we have an ERC20 token, which is great, that sits on the blockchain, but we have this holochain mutual credit that sits underneath it. And it's very much similar to holochain which is the hot token, and holofuel. So we have IOEN, which is the token, and we have IOEC, which is our community currency. And so what that means is we don't have to worry about any of the problems that blockchain is focused on or has had experience in terms of mining or speed of transactions or capacity or anything like that, because we just use this completely different system at the local level. So in the devices is a version of holofuel. In the devices is actually the mutual credit. And so what that means is, from a utility perspective for us, is that it opens up many more avenues for fluidity in transactions, many more avenues for high density transactions, high frequency transactions. And that changes the way that the energy can be transacted and basically put into systems in different ways. Because energy is all electrons, right? But it's lots of different stuff to use it for different ways. So that's kind of like the technical reason, but I think there's a bigger reason here. Kim Stanley Robinson's book, The Ministry of the Future, talks about the complementary currency of a climate coin. And there's lots of climate coins out there that doing good work for carbon sequestration and things like that. But I think the theory and the process of having a complementary currency is really important. Because what that means is, and we've had complementary currencies throughout the history of the universe. Go to the car wash and you put in your money and it gives you tokens. It doesn't give you money, but you can plug it into the car wash to wash your car. That's a complementary currency. You can only use it within that ecosystem, but you get a benefit for using that currency, because you get a bit more of that currency than you do than just using your dollars or your cents in your wallet. So what I think is important here is that the blockchain represents, and I'll say blockchain, but I mean Web3 in general, represents a new way of ownership over where this data is going to reside and where the world is going to head in terms of these complementary currencies to fiat. So we'll have fiat, that's great, that's useful, but we can do so much more with more liquidity and with lower friction with these complementary currencies, such as IOEN, to enable more people to participate in it in new ways. And so I think that's why it's important. And that's why we're still so at the early stages of how this world is going to work, this new climate tech, FinTech world. And the interesting thing about that is that Kim Stanley Robinson was writing about climate change and climate tech in his book. It's a fiction, but in reality, we're building the energy version of that climate coin, and that's really important because it can be used in many different ways. And therefore, when it depends on who you're talking to, when we dive into blockchain, most of the time we just don't even really need to talk about it. But I think what's really important is when we're talking in this community with people who really get fintech and people who really want to see these new mechanisms be used, the fact that we can run a currency through devices at a device level and have that data completely secure, completely private, and completely scalable is something that we cannot do with legacy systems. It's all got to go through a central processing component. Even if it's a server that's near your house, it's still a centralized processing component. We need to match distributed energy resources with a distributed computing system, which has distributed payments and settlements. Because otherwise, we're going to end up with all these distributed energy resources, solar, batteries, EVs, moving around all the time, and no way of really tracking who has spent it, who's being billed here, how is that being settled over here. It's incredibly difficult. If you speak to retailers around the world who sell electricity, and that is just from the poles and wires out there into your house, they still get billing wrong. How is that the case? And they're still just updated to send PDFs. Like this is crazy. It's going to be 2023, not too far away. We have to have net zero by 2030. There's no more time to faff around the edges. So we need a system that's going to deal with this influx of these technologies really fast. And that's why we built ION. So that's why I think it's so important that we have these complementary systems. It's not replacing, it's about being complementary.
I think that's a very important point, right? The complementary element rather than replacement. We have the parallel conversation around central bank digital currencies where everybody's imagined that's going to be replacing them, replacing existing systems, but it's in a sense going to start off with being complementary and probably similar timelines, right? And I want to just build on that community element of it, right? One being for anyone who doesn't understand blockchain, essentially you have to look at it like a software operating system, your iOS or your Android. You just end up choosing a different software system. You don't really know what's underneath. You're dealing with the end user interface. And that's what happens with most applications is you'll then build a layer on which you can use. So for those who understand Java, etc., that's what it is when it comes to blockchain. But I want to bring in an element of how are you have clients like the property company that you mentioned, but for impact, right? Especially for climate change and for large scale impact, finding the right partners and working with them is going to be very critical. You guys are all about the grid and connectivity. And I would like to understand if you could give a couple of examples of specific partners you've worked with, right, in the ecosystem and how that meshes in what you're doing.
Yeah, great question. So the partners kind of fall into some different categories. So there's infrastructure partners that we've worked with. So for example, we've worked with Monash University on developing, actually that's where we kind of, the embryonic development of this protocol came from. We developed and worked with them to push this across their entire smart city here. So that's a good example of an infrastructure partner that's pulled it through. We've worked with one of the major banks before, working on how do we integrate this to an energy payment system, a sort of energy currency ecosystem within their community. And then property development has been one of our kind of big ones, just because when you think about energy is kind of this weird thing that's sort of, it's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And so the only place you really experience electricity is in your home or in your workplace, where you're actually switching on lights and computers and stuff like that. So actually being placed in the home made a lot of sense for us to do that. But as we go forward, I actually see the real benefits of this, especially from an impact point of view, is the adjacent markets that sit across from energy, because energy is essentially just another commodity. Just like data provision is in telcos, just like financial services are in the financial services world. Like basically, like you've got these different adjacent markets. And energy, for example, here in Australia, we have telcos that sell energy. We have different kind of insurance companies that are involved in the energy markets. They're all kind of playing in this energy space because it's just another commodity. And so I think what's interesting here is that for impact, we can't be just looking down the same old lens of hey, there's a company who used to burn coal and now they're going to do a wind farm and they're the one who sells you all your energy. That's just not the way it's going to be. Yes, they are going to change and do that, but actually there's a whole bunch of other organizations who are going to be involved in the energy value chain that will be part of this. And so our partners, we're looking at this now. Partners are large smart cities infrastructure builders who are building smart cities from the ground up so they can build in this currency, bake it in at the very base level. We're looking at partnerships with all shared assets that will be the different departments in there. So we work with an organization that does that in Europe and in North America and in Australia. We work with organizations that are putting neighborhood batteries in. So a battery that sits at the end of your street that you don't have to put in your house, you can just interact with that battery. And we're working with EV charging organizations for how those EV chargers are going to be able to carry a balance. Essentially, you carry a balance in your EV as you travel around that's connected to your balance at home that then is used to pay for your charging in an easy way.
Okay, that's quite clear. Yeah. No, I was just going to say, look, I think you're bringing in more of the features of a blockchain that cannot be done typically in a lot of use cases, right? It's real time, it's traceable, it's engaging everybody else, and you get a much smarter, connected world. I would like to know what are your other, technology or, from a product perspective, what kind of things are you looking to introduce in the coming few months before we hit, say, 2023?
Yeah, great. So some cool stuff that's happened recently is that so we've embedded the ION protocol within local smart devices. Right now we're running on a Raspberry Pi 4, but it's essentially a little box that sits in your home that can track and trace and push all this through around, and that's really exciting. We are opening up, as I said, the bounty program to bring in new developers to deliver this. We have an NFT program that's coming out, and this is not NFTs for speculation. This is utility NFTs. So we've already released some of these associated with the first ability to take ION and use it as a way to donate value from certain places in the world to other places. So we just made a donation of energy value into a microgrid in Rwanda at a refugee camp there for a number of entrepreneurs. And so what that means is people with excess energy or people with excess ION who want to stake that, they can gain an NFT, and we take that mechanism and use that to donate money to other grids around the world so they can upgrade themselves into the ION sphere of technology. So those things are running. What's important about that for us is that there's a whole bunch of DeFi opportunities out here that have got financial implications and financial benefits that we don't see in the standard markets that will be really beneficial for the energy space. And so that's why we think the metaverse for energy and the way that energy can interact with these DeFi markets is really important, because this is going to be a way to access more capital into these projects, which need to happen faster. But it's also a way for the innovation that's happening in DeFi to filter into to energy specifically. And that's, so we essentially, ION creates a bridge, right? It's got the ERC20 token in the middle, it's got the holochain, ION mutual credit at the bottom, and then it goes from the ERC20, it goes up into DeFi and back again. So we've created this kind of direct link in through from DeFi down into these local devices in your home. And the idea from that is that if you can make some savings in your home and your devices can act together and coordinate, the utility of us is therefore the ability you can use ION to then make those transactions happen and integrate with what's the kind of benefits that are coming from DeFi. So I think that's where we're ending up as an organization, is really an integrator and an ability to sort of integrate between DeFi and the kind of higher levels of blockchain down into the kind of standard stuff like smart plugs in your home and your washing machine. That's pretty cool. The other one is that, we've got some cool stuff happening probably in late June, early July with the first installations of our solar miners. So we're pretty excited about that. That's going to be at a residential level, which is pretty cool. Okay, that's pretty cool. I'm going to, probably as we come towards the end of this conversation, I would really want to double click on one point, as some of my friends like saying, right? Which is, for many people, crypto blockchain is highly energy intensive, right? Now, this is based on proof of work, as we both know about it, and we're seeing them move away, especially with proof of stake and a lot of the modern day
protocols are looking to be, climate neutral, if not, energy efficient. So this for some people would be contradictory to the work that you're trying to do, which is for energy conservation, climate change. But on the other hand, you are using things like ERC20, which is an Ethereum-based token, and we're talking about DeFi and the metaverse. Metaverse is also expected to be very highly energy consuming. So how do you counter this, or what are people missing if they have to connect the two and understand about the impact of energy utilization in what ION Tech is doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So firstly, when we're talking about the way transactions happen in ION, when it's happening at mutual credit level, there's no mining, there's no carbon implications of that anywhere, because it doesn't rely on those kind of standard consensus mechanisms that we see in the blockchain. So first of all, when we get down to the ERC20 level, when we get down to the holochain mutual credit level in ION, then we don't have to worry about any of that energy implications. When it's sitting at the ERC20 level, yes, there's still an energy implication there, but that's not where the majority of transactions will happen. In fact, the very fewest transactions will happen there. The majority will happen at the mutual credit level. So we've kind of built in the fact that it won't use significant energy at that local level. But you're right, when we're talking about everything that we're going to DeFi now, if we're going through Ethereum, if we're going through any of the major other protocols, there's going to be a carbon impact there. So what we have done is we've mapped out what it looks like for us at a local level, how many transactions, what transactions we can cover to reduce carbon, because that's the ambition of what this is. But it's also the ambition, and I think this is really important for us to understand as we move forward here, that it's not about how much energy we use. We should be able to use as much energy as we possibly want to on Earth, and we're going to have to use more and more energy as we electrify everything. The question is how that energy is produced and how efficient is the use of that energy. And so if we were to say that if every time we were using Ethereum, it was actually created and mined on a solar miner that was run on 100% clean energy, then we wouldn't worry about it at all. And that's what's going to happen as we move forward. There's going to be more energy that's coming from distributed energy resources, from clean energy resources, and we'll be using that for the blockchain. Now, are we there yet? Absolutely not. And there is a huge problem right now if we're going to be considering where the energy is coming from for the blockchain, if that's going to proliferate. But we need to kind of understand, okay, what's the transition here? The transition here is we've got to have these stepping stones, which are like holochain mutual credit, which means we don't spend any energy. Stepping stones like solar miner, where we use 100% clean energy to do any mining of any protocol, and then move ourselves towards this future where these different devices speak to each other in real time. And that's what ION's mission is. Actually, it's about energy value. It's about saying, hey, I'm willing to take down my energy today if yours goes up, and vice versa tomorrow. And that balances out our mutual credit. And so I think it's a really great point. And people say, if you're in crypto, you're spending all this time burning fossil fuels to do your mining. It's to a certain extent, it's true, right? That is happening. But it's what we've got to do is we've got to focus on how can we use the technology to push us to a much better future as fast as possible. And the question is what we're doing in blockchain, or what we're doing in holochain and ION, a faster way of getting us to that outcome, that net result outcome, which is net zero, than it is to do the old version. And our opinion is that if we can include more people in this mission, if we can bring more people along and include them with this new transactive energy economy, which means they get benefits from these new technologies that are coming in, not just a few people, but everybody, then we think it's worth doing that to get to that end result. And I think, especially because we built in this fact that it's not running on ERC20 at the local level, we're pretty happy with the way that's unfolding as a way to deal with the carbon approach, because all of our work is premised on finding those clean energy resources and use them to the highest level possible.
Right. Adam, it's been really fascinating listening about ION Tech, and I'm sure we could have a very long conversation as we deep dive into this, right? Energy is going to be supremely important. We have to move towards more sustainable means of generating energy. The current conflict in Europe showcases the need, and it's two-faced, right? Because we didn't have enough renewable energy, we are dependent on fossil fuel, which means that the supply is cut off. And energy is so fundamental to everything we do now, especially fuel, that the repercussions are financially very deep, right? Because once oil prices go up, both gas and others, you then have a cascading effect that leads to 10-20%, if not more, impact on your wallets, right? Straight away. Plus, we have other impacts that come in. You then have forced to people continue to look at coal-generated energy, which is again an issue because that's more highly polluting. So all of these come into picture, but being able to connect grids where there is excess energy usage, but also monitoring and knowing your own electric footprint, if I may say, right? We're all, as you say, we're all connected beings, but we're all made of electrons and electricity. That's what keeps us running. And so fundamentally, IOEN Tech is helping us power ourselves, right? I got my coffee for my power for this morning, but it's been fascinating talking to you. And I want to thank you once again for joining us today. And I look forward to speaking more to your team and yourselves on how you're changing and your updates. I'll be lining up for that NFT once it drops, but more so because we are looking at cause that helps in the real world use cases of NFTs versus speculative NFTs, which is what I see the industry moving towards as well. So thank you once again. And if you have any final words, please do share. Yeah.
No, thanks, Musheer. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you about this. Fantastic questions. And I just love, you're hitting the nail on the head, right? Climate tech, FinTech, that's where this is. That's where the action is going to be for the next 10, at least the next 8 years, probably the next 10 to 15 years. So it's awesome that you're doing this. Thank you, Musheer, and happy to take any questions if people want to just reach out to me at IOEN Tech, and just, looking forward to the conversations. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks again.
Thanks, Musheer.